Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Deptula, Air Force Association's Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. And welcome to our Aerospace Nation speaker series. We're really pleased that Lieutenant General Warren Berry could join us today. Lieutenant General Berry is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics, Engineering, and Force Protection at Headquarters, United States Air Force. In that role, he's responsible to the Chief of Staff for leadership, management, and integration of all Air Force logistics readiness, aircraft munitions and missile maintenance, civil engineering and security forces, as well as, if that's not enough, setting policy that reflect enhancements to combat readiness and the quality of life of our airmen. So welcome, Warren, and thanks very much for taking the time to join us today. I'd like to kick off today's events by giving you some time to provide us a rundown on issues that are the top of your concerns and agenda today. So over to you, General.
Well, thanks, General Deptula. It's great to be with you. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to highlight the work of our basing and logistics airmen. And maybe in my introductory comments, I should start there with the airmen, right? If you think about the basing and logistics portfolio and what we concern ourselves with here in the HAF A4, it's civil engineering, security forces, and all forms of logistics. You think about the Air National Guard, active duty, and Air Force Reserve, officer, enlisted, and civilian. You get about 288,000 strong. So, our job is to give them the policy and the resources to do the mission, but we need to give them a shout out because they're the ones out there toiling every day to make this happen, to make the mission go, to build readiness, to sustain the infrastructure, and to protect our resources and our people. And so we need to give them a shout out and thank them for what they do as they work their magic at the installation level every single day. As far as priorities, certainly COVID has taken up a fair amount of our bandwidth of late as we try to deal with the pandemic and what that pandemic means to the Air Force and Air Force operations. But beyond COVID, as you might imagine, our priorities are pretty well aligned to the Air Force and the OSD priorities. So we're very focused in the A4 on recovering and building readiness. In fact, a little over a year ago, we took a critical look at our entire sustainment enterprise. And we asked ourselves, how can we fundamentally shift how we operate inside this enterprise that we call logistics and sustainment? And just over a year ago, then Secretary Wilson and the Chief, General Goldfein, signed that strategic framework, and we've been busy implementing that ever since. So its major lines of effort really are to capitalize on some unrealized capacity in our repair network, moving workloads so that we can improve productivity, reduce costs, and actually, enhance the repair capacity at lower levels. That will also be incredibly important to us in a national defense strategy kind of scenario. It builds a more resilient supply chain, so we're not as dependent on sole sources and single source suppliers, but can build out not just competition, but also then some surge capacity when you think about that national defense strategy scenario. And it focuses on big data. So allowing us to really get after predictive maintenance by really transforming the piles of data that we own into actionable information, and allowing us then to take unscheduled maintenance and turn it into scheduled maintenance. So we're repairing aircraft at a time and a place of our choosing, not where the airplane decides to break, but where we have the resources available to effect a repair in the most expeditious and efficient manner. So that's one thing that we're after. Of course, I mentioned the National Defense Strategy, so we're focused on the key operational problem in the National Defense Strategy that we call logistics under attack. We know that in a future conflict, we're not going to be able to move the mountain of iron in that future fight, and we also know that logistics will be contested. It won't be like it's been the last 18 years where we've had freedom of maneuver and freedom of movement, right? We are going to be contested physically and from a cyber perspective. So our adversaries have watched, they've learned lessons, and we know that they're prepared to take away some of the advantages that we have certainly shown in the last 20 years. So we've developed this strategy that we call persistent logistics to get after the logistics under attack problem set. And it's really underpinned by the key concepts of posture, sense, and respond. They're pretty self-explanatory, right? Posture is how do we set the theater, but maybe we don't set the theater in the same old ways that we did before, right? We do it in new ways, perhaps with different material and different equipment. Sensing is our ability to rapidly see the changing environment, see the changing requirements at the speed of relevance that the warfight is happening. And respond, as you might guess, is rapidly shift those resources to mitigate the disruptions and allow us to continue the fight. It's very essential to us that we build this strategy and the concepts because that will largely fuel that future fight that the National Defense Strategy tells us we need to prepare for. And then in the CE and security forces realm, we're implementing, we're in the middle of implementing what we coined with SAF-IE as the installation investment strategy, where we're fundamentally changing how we invest in the physical plant across our 80+ installations. And so our models tell us that with modest, stable funding and with a new way of investing those funds into that physical plant, we're actually going to be able to start working off the backlog that we have in infrastructure investment rather than watching that backlog grow over time. And then we embarked on a very thoughtful Reconstitute Defender initiative, whose goal was to really improve the lethality and the readiness of the men and women we asked to guard our nation's treasure. And so it's been a busy year and a half or so that I've been in the A4. There's more that we're getting after, as you might imagine, but that's probably a good strategic concept and strategic overview of where we're focused today. I think you're muted.
Yeah, thanks. It happens to all of us, even though we do this day in and day out.
I know.
So Warren, thanks for that context and insight. And thanks most of all for all that you and your team are doing to ensure that the total Air Force is able to execute and sustain combat ops when called upon to do so. So let's jump into the topic in a little bit more detail. Last year was the Air Force's Year of the Defender, where General Goldfein clearly recognized the importance of security forces in providing base defense, without which, obviously, we can't project power. Multi-domain ops is going to require a robust network of basing and infrastructure that really depends on our security forces. The Reconstitute Defender initiative grew out of this focus. But what's most people take away is simply the switch from the Beretta M9 to the Sig Sauer M18 pistol. Could you talk a little bit more about what this initiative did to transform the field?
Sure. I think RDI has been a pretty exciting thing to watch. It had started before I got into the A4, and I got to watch it progress since then. It was, certainly the transition to the M9 to the M18 was part of it, right? But it was much, much more than that. It was really about improving the lethality and the readiness of our Defender force. As you think about all the missions that they perform, all the things that we ask them to guard and to protect and to defend, it was really about getting after a plethora of things that we thought would really improve that readiness and lethality. As it turns out, the team just completed the last of the 900 action items that we were tracking and tracing to get after RDI, and so it's been a journey, right? So what is it beyond just the M9 and the M18 that we're doing? I think the first thing that was really important to us was to institutionalize that defender culture, that elite defender culture, right? To get after the fact that it means something to wear the beret. It means something to defend and protect the nation's critical resources and people, no matter where it is that you stand guard. And so culture was a big piece of this, right? Reinforcing that elite defender culture across the defenders from the reserve, guard, and active duty. And then we noticed that we knew we had to improve the lethality of the force as part of this equation. So it's about weapons, it's about personal gear, it's about communications, it's about the vehicles they use, right? The tools of the trade in order to do the mission that they're being asked to do. So yes, it's about the new handgun, but it's about more than that. It's about other equipment. It's about an improved grenade launcher, right? Going to the M320 grenade launcher. It's about having better precision rifles at their disposal. It's about retiring and replacing their tired Humvees, up-armored Humvees that are starting to show signs of age, right, that we see in aircraft weapon systems, and replace it with the Army's program of the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, the JLTV, and committing to give those vehicles first to the nuclear mission and to our training centers so our defenders can really get used to what that vehicle is capable of and what that weapon system does for them in the fight. We deployed the very first female body armor as part of Reconstitute Defender. We have a new ballistic helmet. We have a new vest that gives added protection and added capability to the defender in ways that they didn't have before. And then perhaps most importantly on the equipment side is, in terms of improving their lethality, is the communications, command, and control to really give those defenders the battle space awareness they need to be able to defend assets from wherever that threat may be originating from on or off the installation. So that was a huge part of this as well. So you got to outfit them, you got to equip them to get to the lethality. And then the last part of it was really focusing on training. We had fallen into I guess a pattern where we did a lot of just-in-time training for our defenders, right? We would qualify them on their systems and their tactics, techniques, and procedures, and then we would top them off at a higher end training before they went to deploy. And that was the cycle that we were in for a long time, and maybe a cycle that was okay for a counterterrorism fight, but it's not a cycle that's going to work very well if you get into a fight that the National Defense Strategy talks about. And so we changed the whole mindset behind training and focus less on qualifying training and more on proficiency. Doing what I call the unconscious competence, right? Repetition, muscle memory, getting the defenders comfortable with the techniques, tactics, procedures that they'll use on a daily basis, getting them comfortable with their gear and their equipment, getting them comfortable with their weapons to do more firing, more simulation training, more dry firing, things that really get after more proficiency than just qualification. And then, really empowering the NCOs, the leaders of the career field, to do leader-led training, to empower them to take responsibility for training their airmen and getting them as prepared as they can and getting them as proficient as they can across the spectrum. So it has been a journey. We know we're not done yet. We may have closed all 900 action items, so we know we have more work to do, but we're convinced that that whole RDI, Reconstitute Defender initiative, is turning out a better defender today than it was just a year ago. So we're pretty excited with the results, and we'll continue to press forward on it.
Well, sounds like some great results in 900 action items. That's a lot, particularly focused in that particular area. So a great work, and hope that it continues to serve our security forces well. Now, on a different subject, it's been almost 2 years now since Tyndall Air Force Base was destroyed by Hurricane Michael. As devastating as that storm was, it also created the opportunity to not just rebuild the base, but to revision what an air base of the future should be. Could you share with us what that means and some of your insights into this effort?
Sure. So it was interesting. It was a catastrophic storm. There's no doubt about it. We went down shortly after Hurricane Michael went through the Panhandle. We landed at Hurlburt. We flew over from Hurlburt to Tyndall to kind of just get an idea of what had really gone on and what the damage looked like. It was pretty amazing. You take off from Hurlburt and you fly east, right? And as you're flying across the landscape, trees intact, right? You're not seeing a lot of damage until you get probably a mile or two from Tyndall, and then it was just devastation. It was really one of the more amazing things I've seen, I think, in my experience in my tour. But it was a catastrophic storm. But as our chief says, in every challenge, an opportunity. And so while Tyndall took a major hit during that hurricane, it really did give us an opportunity to revision what that installation should be, right? And so we committed to rebuild the base we need, not the base we had. And so that's really where the Tyndall focus is right now. And we've had a lot of support from Congress to really try to execute that idea. It's not just about rebuilding the base you need either, in terms of strengthening its resilience from hurricane force winds or floodplain and elevation. That matters, right? And siting matters, and the construction standards matter. But it's more than that. It was about getting after an installation where you could do some master planning and really have campuses, right? So right now there's 12 campuses on Tyndall that really have complementary missions. And it gives you an opportunity to build a base in the way that you could have if you had started from scratch. And so we're doing that from a campus perspective, and letting contracts in a campus way, right, to get after the building of some of those facilities. We've done a lot more in terms of sensoring. So what are the sensors we need on the facilities at Tyndall? And how do we build a smart grid across Tyndall to give us indications of what's happening with facilities, what's happening with key systems, be it power, power energy, be it lighting on the airfield, be it all those things, right? What are those sensors that we can employ that give us information about what's happening so that we can, bring predictive maintenance into civil engineering in some way, shape, or form. So all of that kind of came together in Tyndall and really gave us the opportunity to, like I said, build the base we need and not just rebuild Tyndall into the way it was before. So we're pretty excited about how it's going.
Do you see that there may be some of these new capabilities that you might be able to integrate into other Air Force bases and perhaps use them to improve the functionality of the rest of the Air Force bases?
So I think the sensors are probably the more straightforward one to start to propagate across other installations, right? All those sensors are helpful in understanding what's going on the infrastructure itself, and to build plans to get after repair and to be more predictive in how we get after repair and understand the condition of facilities and major systems better. So I think the sensors have wide applicability that you can kind of get after in the near term. The campus kind of construct that we talked about, a little harder to do. We've got a massive physical plant in the Air Force, 80 plus installations. It's hard to reorganize and repurpose facilities, right? That takes a lot of money, first of all. So you can do the master plan, and we are doing that a lot at all of our installations to kind of lay out what does that facility of the future, the installation of the future look like. Acting on that master plan is something that's going to take a lot longer. So the near-term sensor is really easy. Long-term master planning, mid-term really easy. I shouldn't say really easy, more straightforward to do, to have the vision of what that installation could and should be. But then actually putting the resources to it is probably going to take a little bit longer.
Okay. Now, your Red Horse teams were critical to the initial recovery and rebuild at Tyndall. And although the damage from Hurricane Michael, it was not from adversary attacks, it was an excellent real-world demonstration of Red Horse capabilities. What did they learn from their work at Tyndall?
I think what we learned from Hurricane Michael, Tyndall, and using the Red Horse is, maybe we just validated, right, that Red Horse is a pretty incredible mission force multiplier in the mission that they perform. I think it revalidated the training that we do with Red Horse and their ability to exercise that mission set at a place like Tyndall, where they really went in and they had to operate with nothing. They were pretty much the only force on the ground, other than the base defense forces that we brought in from Moody to provide some security over the installation as well. I mean, they were there operating almost in isolation. And so I think we really learned that, it's in their DNA to recover air bases. It's in their DNA to think through these wicked problems that a Hurricane Michael at Tyndall really presented to them. And then I think, we learned that they operated out of Hurlburt and commuted, if you will, to Tyndall. And in some ways, it was perhaps a preview of the future in terms of a hub and spoke. How they would go from a main operating base to a spoke and execute their mission, again, with little resources at the location where they're operating, and then use that in the adaptive operations concepts that we're working through in the Air Force today. So I think we learned that there's a lot of applicability there as we look to the future and what Red Horse can do.
Well, thanks for that insight on Red Horse teams and how they're transforming. We've had such large, established, and relatively safe bases for so long that I don't believe we think enough about the buildup and reconstitution of basing. I know this is a multifaceted question for you, but would you spend some time discussing how civil engineering fits into agile combat employment?
I think one of the key ways that they do is, I remember when I was stationed over in USAFE, and we would send small civil engineering teams out to do the surveys on what we expected to be intermediate staging bases, forward operating locations, support bases of some kind in the operational plans that UCOM was putting together. And so those civil engineering teams would go out and look at air bases and air patches that we expected to use, and they would do those surveys to kind of level set what was there and what its capabilities were to support the O plan, and then what we would need to bring because those resources weren't available at that location, be it fire, fuel, et cetera, right? So they'd go out and they'd drill into the pavement and understand what the quality of the pavement and the runway was. And all of that data, right, the status of the infrastructure, what the local community had to offer in terms of resources for, fire protection, et cetera. So all of that would come back in from these site surveys that the civil engineering team would lead and really inform our operational planning. And so when you think about the future and adaptive operations and agile combat employment, that's going to be absolutely crucial for us as we think about where we want to operate from. What are the conditions of those locations? What are the capabilities of those locations? How do I improve those capabilities and conditions at those locations so that I don't have to bring as much, right? We can't move that mountain of iron. So how do I help partners and allies in that case build capability, build capacity at locations that we think we might use in terms of what the combatant commander expects to execute in their operational plan. So that's a huge part of what the civil engineers do today and how it plays into what we're looking at in the future as well.
Oh, very good. Let me continue the conversation on agile combat employment, but focusing on logistics. And we all know the old saying that amateurs focus on tactics and professionals focus on logistics. Agile combat employment cannot be successful without a robust logistics enterprise. So what are some of the biggest challenges that need to be solved to enable agile combat employment to be successful in a contested theater?
It's funny, you use the word robust, right? And I think that's a good word to use. It does have to be robust, but at the same time, it can't be onerous. And so that's kind of the lens that we're looking at as we think about logistics in this adaptive operations environment. And so if it can't be onerous, then it really begs the question, then how do you rethink agility? What does agility look like in this space of sustainment and logistics for agile combat employment? We know we're going to have a communications denied environment, right? So the typical pull system where a unit is out there and needs a part and places an order against the sustainment enterprise to have that part delivered in a communications degraded environment, that's not going to be available. So our agility is, how do I move from a pull system to a push system where I have data that readily tells me when something is going to be needed, and then I have the wherewithal to push it to them in advance of need because that communications isn't going to be there for me. What kind of different distribution systems am I going to need? Getting multiple parts to and multiple supplies to multiple locations that are on the move. That requires a different kind of distribution system and a distribution mindset with agility. That then calls into question, okay, what's my command and control, right? How do I know what's happening? How do I have the situational awareness of what's going on in that space so that I can command and control the resources to get the parts to the right place, perhaps in a push system through a distribution system that's agile to get it there in a timely manner. And then, we know that our air bases are not going to be sanctuaries. And so no matter where I operate from in an agile combat employment environment, I've got to protect the base, right? So what does air-base air defense look like? All big things that we need to think about and solve in the Agile Combat Employment environment, and all things that we're actively looking at as we try to build out the concept.
It really is a challenging problem set, even to the point where the logistics required to support the ACE concept of ops differs between the European theater and the Pacific theater. Can you describe some of these differences?
So I look at EUCOM first, right? And let's talk about air-based defense. So EUCOM from day one, virtually every Air Force capability is inside a threat ring. In Indo-PACOM and CENTCOM, a little different. There are some that certainly are in a threat ring, but there are others that are not. And so you have a little bit more freedom of maneuver and freedom of movement there in Indo-PACOM and CENTCOM that maybe you can take advantage of. That's very different in the two theaters. Certainly the threat is different in each of the two theaters from that perspective. You've got to, from a logistics standpoint, think about the tyranny of distance. So PACOM, much more spread out, much more challenging distribution environment, right? EUCOM, probably a little bit more straightforward in terms of the infrastructure that's already available to you to use from a distribution perspective. But it's not without its challenges either, right? As the rail gauges change going from Western Europe to Eastern Europe and the former Eastern Bloc countries. And that's a challenge then to move supplies forward and move equipment forward as well in the EUCOM theater. So the distribution challenges are different. The tyranny of distance is different. And then how I pre-position assets is different too, right? I've been pre-positioning in EUCOM for a long time. I've got partner nations in the European theater like Luxembourg that we've been using for quite a while to pre-position assets in the European theater to support the EUCOM O-planes. I don't have as many of those partners easily identified today in PACOM. And so it's about, the partners and allies that we ask to help us with pre-positioning assets, because that mountain of iron isn't necessarily going to get over there when we would like it in an NDS fight. So it's got to be there in the right amount, in the right quantity, in the right place early enough that we can take advantage of it. And so then, what we pre-position and how we pre-position it in the two theaters is going to be a little bit different as well.
Do you have enough resources to execute the ACE concept, and what do you need more of?
Well, I think I probably ought to thank Congress, right? They have given us some resources in the European Deterrence Initiative, and the language that we're seeing this year has some resources for a Pacific Deterrence Initiative, and that has allowed us to get after some pre-positioned equipment, material, and supplies and vehicles to buy in advance, right? To set the theater in Europe, and with the Pacific Deterrence Initiative funds will almost assuredly allow us to do the same in the Pacific. So I should probably thank the Congress for giving us those resources to be able to lead turn some of this need in the theaters. I think as we mature the concept, we'll better understand what else we need too. So clearly a lot of what we have today is applicable in an Agile Combat Employment environment, but we also know that as the concept matures and we start to do analysis of the concept and identify capability gaps, we know we're going to have to get after some other things that might be a different way of doing distribution and lift. It might be a different way of doing airfield recovery. It might be different equipment that's lighter and leaner that allows us to set up in a more expeditious manner with less people, right? So those gaps will come to light as we continue to refine the concept. But I think the one challenge that's probably bigger than all the others, and none of them are necessarily small, is really getting after the logistics command and control. So remember, we talked about that posture, sense, and respond. So what is that sensing that I have available to me to observe and orient the logistics enterprise in real time in that contested environment? I think it's interesting that COVID, right, has kind of exposed this challenge for us as we've dealt with the coronavirus. We have the data, but it's about being able to correlate the data, fuse the data, understand the bigger picture, and access to data, and an ability to bring it together in a way that makes it actionable at the speed of relevance. Now, it was not fatal in COVID by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not trying to say that. But what it did do is it did kind of expose some of the seams that we have in our data and our information systems that we really need to get after. And if you think of the coronavirus as an adversary, the next adversary is going to be even tougher on us when it comes to logistics, command and control, and an ability to do that, observe and orient in that contested environment. So that's probably our biggest challenge right now that we're getting after. But there's no shortage of things that we need to solve and concepts that we need to mature as the ball moves forward.
Now, cross-training airmen is one of the new ideas of the Agile Combat Employment concept. For example, teaching mobility maintainers how to fuel fighters and conduct other servicing functions. But you've just recently reversed your maintenance shortage and are now managing a very young force with low experience levels. Is age too much, too soon for these airmen?
Well, as you said, we had about a 4,000 maintainer maintenance gap that we closed over the course of about 3 years. But we talk about it takes 7 years to build a 7 level. We're questioning whether it should take us that long, right? Are there new things we could do, different ways we could do it to train our airmen faster, make them more proficient faster through virtual reality and other means? But you're right. At the moment, we have more 3 levels and apprentices than we do have 5 levels and 7 levels. But I'll also say that I'll never underestimate the capabilities of our airmen. They're coming into the service with more skills than ever. They're tech savvy, and they're really eager to learn and do more. When we did exercises for Agile Combat Employment at various locations, to include in Europe, the airmen were really excited about what we were asking them to do. Now, we weren't asking them to be a 7 level in a completely different career field, right? That's unrealistic at this phase. But they were excited about being able to do other things beyond their core specialty and understand better how they fit into the broader team. And the fact that we have these new airmen gives us a chance to train them differently, right? And give them a different kind of culture that really calls into play this adaptive environment. We're not going to put all this on their backs. We can't do Agile Combat Employment just through the airmen and putting more on them. But clearly there's an eagerness and an appetite for them to do more. Having said that, multi-capable airmen, it can't be a pickup game. So there are some things that we need to do here to really institutionalize it. So there's things that we do at a very basic level. You remember the old Airman's Manual? And so we need to kind of bring those skills back. What are the expeditionary skills we expect every airman to have, from self-aid buddy care to post-attack reconnaissance and things like that, right? So that's very basic that we can do at a local installation level. The installations also have the capability to do what I would call cross-utilization training. So they can take some airmen and show them the basics of how to assist in a particular task rather than do the particular task, right? And so that might be a supply technician who drives the fuel truck to the airplane so the crew chief can refuel it, right? So those are things we can do at a local level and train airmen through cross-utilization training to get them some more skills to help with the lighter, leaner team that we would take into an Agile Combat Employment environment. But then institutionally, right, we need to ask ourselves, are there different ways we need to think about career fields? Some of our modern weapon systems have done this. Crew chiefs, propulsion, and hydraulics, right, kind of all come together into one career field because they have similar tasks and similar baseline training requirements and skill sets. We need to ask ourselves with, maybe vehicle maintenance and aerospace ground equipment, is that really just small engine repair? And can we train those airmen across both of those career specialties and make them more multi-capable, multifunctional airmen? But those are things that have to be done institutionally because there's a training tail to it. We need to do it through AETC to make sure that every airman has the same level of competence moving in, that they're proficient and then safe in executing the mission in that environment. So all three of those, I think, will come to play as we move forward. Then the last thing is, you need to give them the opportunity to train together. And if we're going to ask them to do this new task, then we got to create exercises for them to actually ply their trade, whether that's as the assistant in a cross-utilization training environment, or as the cross-functional airmen that we decide to build institutionally. But you have to get them together to train together as a team in that kind of agile combat employment environment.
Very good. Now, just a couple of minutes ago, you mentioned that command and control is so very important to logistics, especially as we look to future operational concepts like the ACE idea. Getting the right stuff to the right place at the right time is not magic. It takes a lot of data, connectivity, modeling, and control. So how has the logistics community been investing in and preparing for this whole notion of joint all-domain command and control?
Great question. I harken back to the conversation we had earlier about log C2. That is in some ways our component under JADC2. So, JADC2 is having the decision advantage in multi-domain operations. And so in the log enterprise sustainment, we want to have that same decision advantage in order to support multi-domain operations, because, sustainment and logistics follows ops. And so we've got to be able to have the sense, orient, and respond, posture, sense, and respond in this realm to be able to support multi-domain operations in the way that the operators plan to employ. And so it's going to come down to log C2, and log C2 is largely about our log IT enterprise. So right now, we're right in the middle of the process of rationalizing all of our IT systems. We've actually shut down 200 or so of our IT systems, consolidated, rationalized them down, taken that money, that savings, and plowed it into replacement capabilities, data cloud migration, and edge computing, which we think will be absolutely essential to realizing a log C2 capability moving forward. So we do capture the data that you talked about. We capture it today. We capture it at a rate that's probably too rapid and too voluminous for any one person or organization to really make sense of in real time. It comes from multiple sensors, multiple sources. It comes from onboard aircraft. It comes from SCADA systems that control our infrastructure, other IT systems, and the like. But that data really is the key to our awareness of what's happening in the environment and what's happening in the broader enterprise, to include at home in the depots and the broader supply system. So, and then once that data is in place, we need to protect it, and we need to be able to share it widely. So protecting it means moving a lot of the data into the cloud or into a data lake environment, which gives us multiple fail-safes for resiliency of that data. Once it's in the data lake, we have to be able to share it. We have to connect the systems. We have to remove the stovepipes between those systems so that the data is available to all, and then be able to fuse that data at a rate that the future fight will demand. And then on top of all that, then we can lay on top machine learning, artificial intelligence that can use its predictive capabilities to tell us where to shift resources, where to shift the fight, if you will, to make sure that we've got the log command and control necessary to support the JADC2 and the operations as the operators tend to employ it.
Well, very good. General Barry, you've been doing a lot of work to transform the maintenance and logistics field to be prepared for the kinds of conflict outlined in the National Defense Strategy. How has the logistics community been thinking about providing support in contested environments? Can you talk to us a little bit about concepts like predictive maintenance?
Sure. So the contested environment, much of kind of what I talked about before, where we know we're going to be in a degraded environment. We know that there's going to be times where we're not going to have perfect comms back. And so that pull system that we used to use of ordering a part and expecting it to arrive won't be possible. So you got to move to a push system in that cyber contested environment. Certainly, putting the data in the cloud and the data lake that we talked about helps with the resiliency to perhaps give us the ability to access the data, even if an adversary tries to deny our use. So all of that in play. through all of this as well. But the data is a big part of predictive maintenance. And I'll just tell you that, you know, I continue to believe that predictive maintenance is a real game changer for us as an Air Force. We have long been a fly to fail Air Force. So we'll replace a part only when it fails and only when that part decides to stop working. So the challenge, of course, is that sometimes those parts decide to stop working at the worst possible time, right? It's in the middle of a surge. It's in the middle of a continent that might not have the most robust support that you would want to have in place when an aircraft breaks. So the idea here really is to take the data we already own, the data that's resident in our information systems, or the data that's resident on systems on the aircraft with sensors or things like ACARs or the predictive health monitor on the F-35 is but some examples. But even the information that we have in our information systems, and then putting that machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms on top of it, and then letting that big data tell us when a part is expected to fail before it breaks. It's going to tell us when it breaks before it breaks. And so now I take a whole bunch of what used to be unscheduled maintenance and I can turn it into scheduled maintenance. Now I get to change the part at the time and place of my choosing, not at the time and place when the part decides it wants to break. So why wouldn't I want to change a C5 thrust reverser, for example, at Travis, where I have the trained technicians, I have the infrastructure, I have the facilities, I have the equipment, rather than let that thrust reverser fly to fail and it fails in Nigeria. And now I've got to generate a whole other airplane with the repair parts and the crew to go fix it. It is a readiness hit. It's a huge perturbation to readiness, right, when you have to do things like that. So we've seen it be very powerful and effective in commercial airlines. We are not a commercial airline by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a lot of power in moving unscheduled maintenance into scheduled maintenance. And we're firmly convinced that it will improve our readiness and improve our combat capabilities by doing so.
No, that's very good. Warren, one last big picture question before we open it up to the audience. For a long time, the entire Department of Defense has prioritized leanness and efficiency, modeling logistics after commercial enterprises that are just in time. In a similar manner, maintenance programs have sought to lean costs by removing skill and manning. In practice, this means closing the base back shops and depending on the OEM for delivery of new spares. Both of these concepts are very dependent on a reliable and responsive logistics chain. But this might not be the right paradigm in a contested environment that you just talked about. Could you share your thoughts a little bit on regarding the tension between efficiency and resiliency in future battle space that logistics and maintenance are going to have to operate?
Yeah, you bet. We put a lot of thought into this, right? I think there's a natural tension between the two. I think my predecessors, right, have struggled with this balance between efficiency, cost effectiveness, and resilience and effectiveness of the mission, right? Mission effectiveness, and there's always a tension between the two. So, and the context that you're operating in matters. So, you know, in a counterterrorism fight, where really my supply chain wasn't at risk, my distribution system wasn't challenged, maybe it made sense really to take a little bit more risk in terms of, you know, more efficiency on the scale. But clearly, you know, the National Defense Strategy gives us a different paradigm. And so there are some vulnerabilities there that we think we need to get after, that perhaps rebalance, right, the efficiency and the effectiveness equation as we move forward. So, you know, sole source, single source vendors, they will scale and scope their business to the demand signal that they're being given. I don't for a minute believe that the demand signal that they're going to have during a conflict that the National Defense Strategy envisions is going to be the same as it is in a steady state flying hour program. So how much surge capacity is there really, right? So we kind of think about that in terms of, you know, the efficiency and the effectiveness. But I think we also need to admit that it's not always a binary decision, right? It's not always an either or. There are some things that we can do that really satisfy both parts of efficiency and effectiveness. And as you think about the sustainment framework that I talked about at the very beginning, I think if you went through that and looked at some of the implementation pieces of that we're putting in place, I think you'd see that there are places where we're really doing both efficiency and effectiveness. So I'll give you a few examples. So predictive maintenance, right? One that we already talked about is one way we become much more efficient by capitalizing on more scheduled maintenance than unscheduled maintenance. But we become far more effective by sending aircraft into the fight that we know are healthy, that have the parts already changed because we changed them before they were going to fail. We know additive manufacturing can increase repair capabilities and in many cases can be done more cheaply at the same time. We expanded our repair network integration. We know that we had excess repair capacity in the network that we weren't tapping into. And so we're finding ways to tap into that repair network capacity to increase our repair capabilities across the enterprise. And then one I would say that we chose probably effectiveness over efficiency is the one where, you know, we don't buy parts that don't necessarily have a demand signal on them for a certain period of time. It's about 18 to 24 months. But we also know that some of those parts are really critical. And so I think, you know, as we look forward, we're looking to find ways to purchase those low demand parts so we at least have them somewhere in the enterprise should it fail, as opposed to not having it anywhere in the enterprise. And then you've got to wait 18 to 24 months for industry to spool up and actually make that part for you. So it's a constant balance, right? It's not necessarily binary, but I know that even though there's no magic bullet, we will continue to operationalize a national defense strategy, probably weight a little bit more toward effectiveness than efficiency. But you know, we know that we're spending taxpayer dollars, and so we'll make the smart trades along the way.
Well, very good. And Warren, thanks again for your time and your insights today. We certainly value the dialogue, and we value your thought leadership and all that you do, and as well as your team and what they are doing to solve the logistical challenges of the national defense strategy. Your portfolio truly is the foundation of combat power projection. So on behalf of the Mitchell Institute and all of the AFA, we thank you and your team for all that you do during this very challenging period of U.S. national security.